And we are live streaming.
Sorry about that, folks. I hit the wrong button. Anyway, thank you all. I'd like to call our budget workshop meeting to order. And thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Amy Wharton and all of her team over at Budget and Finance for the incredible amount of work that goes into doing this, which is true every year, I must say, but it seems to be particularly challenging this year to get everything together in light of some continuing revenue challenges as a result of COVID-19, the impacts on our budget and revenues. So I got to extend that thanks, though, to our department heads for keeping things in line and their understanding and all the things they want to do and having to work within the budgets that we've had this past year and going into next. And thank all our employees. And that's going to be the big story, I believe, of this budget, is given where we are with the labor market and the competitions, not just from the private sector, but even, as you'll see, from our neighboring jurisdictions, to stay competitive with an attempt to be competitive with what our employees deserve and what we can pay them. And so, as you'll see, even when you add in all these other things that we're doing, we have some ground to make up, about 3.7 million, and Amy will share the history of all that and how we've gotten there. But you know, the one item of just making a step to get our employee salaries up this year is 5.9 million. So you know, which is more than what we're trying to make up right now. So at the end of the day, I think it's all about our staff and trying to get them where they should be and where they deserve to be in today's market. So anyway, without further elaboration, I will turn this over. We have a pretty extensive presentation for you today, very thoughtful. A lot of work went into it. Amy, take it away. Uh-oh, you're on mute.
I am, sorry. Good afternoon. You hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Yes.
Hopefully my computer will cooperate today. We won't have any glitches. So really, we're just here to talk about the general fund and enterprise fund budgets for 2022. Last time we all met was in October, and I think we were very preliminary at that time. We said we had a $3.3 million shortfall. But that did not include the proposed pay plan, any additional requests from the departments. We are still finalizing some revenues. We didn't have liability property insurance numbers yet. Our lease purchase wasn't finalized, and we were looking into salary savings, I believe is what we discussed. So we still have a lot of work to do from the time that we met with you in October to where we are now. So I just kind of going through that slowly. I think this is what I had provided to you in October, just at 3.3 million, but again, was so very preliminary at that point in time. You can slow me down too if I am going too fast. We've been working with these numbers for months now, so it's probably easier for me than you. So after that, we looked through all the requests from the departments and made some recommendations on items that we thought should be funded based on the department head's prioritization of those items. And really, I mean, nobody was really asking for anything crazy this year. A lot of it was to restore overtime, which was about $1.7 million, and to restore the cuts that were made in 20 and 21, which was 1.89 million. Adding the pay plan adjustment, raising minimum wage to $14 an hour. And then when we made our recommendations for everything that we thought we should include in the budget, it was a shortfall of $19.5 million. So obviously we cannot fund a $19.5 million shortfall. So we looked back through all the revenues. We pulled back the items that we recommended and separated those items out into mandatory life safety items, high priority items, and medium priority items. And then we looked at items that could be funded with other revenue sources. So that was the $19.5 million that we were at. And then as we worked through that process, we finalized revenues. We added $750,000 in the general fund, increased parking revenues by 1.4 million, almost 1.5. And then we increased the transfer in from tourism funds by $1 million. Because we had reduced salary savings quite a bit from last year, or from this year, 2021, because police and fire are hiring so well. But in looking at our other issues in the city, the other departments, we realized that it would take us quite a while in 2021 to hire everybody that we've lost. So we increased salary savings by $3 million. And then we identified $5.6 million in one-time expenditures that we could fund with our ARPA funds. Just raise your hand if you need me to stop. So doing all of that, we ended up with a $2.2 million shortfall, but that does not include the restoration of the 2021 cuts or the restoration of overtime. And if we added overtime back in, that would be an additional $1.7 million. And so this is really kind of the reconciliation that we came to from the shortfall that we had to the 2.2 that we discussed with ad hoc last week. So we increased some revenues, increased salary savings. We reduced recommendations to only funding those items that can be covered with ARPA funds. We added some positions, 2 HUD funded positions, recreation enterprise manager, and positions requested by the mayor for an additional community and homelessness liaison, Hope Center director, and social worker, and then the TNT traffic inspector. So notable items not included. Like I said, the $2.2 million is what you heard in the paper, I think, last week and by the media, because that's what we discussed with ad hoc. But it didn't include the 2021 cuts, or including overtime. And overtime was very important to our departments, especially with the attrition rate we're currently experiencing. So especially for police and fire, it's important. And one of the items, it was one of the items we were really trying very hard to put back into the budget. So with that not included, the shortfall is really 3.9 million, not 2.2. So what's included? Mandatory life safety. Mandatory items are really the rent increases, insurance increases, 1% increase in South Carolina retirement, and contract price increases. Those are really things we have absolutely no control over. They are just what they are. Life safety items, they're just items that we are required to keep our employees safe. The SCBA equipment for the fire department, there's thermal imaging cameras, radios, things like that that are included in the budget. And these are kind of an example of all the life safety mandatory items that were included. It's about $2.3 million. We keep going if that's okay. The pay plan.
Amy, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So just so that we're clear on this, if we include the overtime pay that the departments are asking for, our real shortfall is 3.9 million.
That's correct.
Okay. And this sounds like a silly question, but I'll ask it anyhow. If we were at full staffing, that would increase our shortfall to another 3.3 million.
Well, maybe not quite as much, Councilmember Shade. It just depends. If we didn't have the vacancies that we have right now is what's allowing us to increase salary savings that much. So if we were in a better place, and we had originally, I think, budgeted around $3 million for salary savings. So yeah, I guess you're right. That extra $3 million we would save, yes.
So if we have not filled positions through our attrition or whatever reason, retirement, whatever causes, and that has caused us to, hate to use the word save, but it's shaved off about $3 million of our budget.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
I have a lot more slides on kind of where we are with staffing too, that we'll go through. So the pay plan, why is it so important? Just sort of some point of reference why we're pushing so hard for this pay plan. The county municipalities around us are already ahead of us in minimum wage. Charleston County currently is at $13.50. They plan to move to $15 in July of 2022. Town of Mount Pleasant is at $16.92. Caveat to that is they're a 37.5-hour work week. So our equivalent would be $15.86. But when you're looking at a job posting, nobody realizes that. So it still looks like it's $16.92, if that makes sense. North Charleston is at $15.39, and Charleston Housing Authority is at $15. And as we have talked about several times, you know, we're having a very high turnover rate. And the most notable reason why people are leaving is pay. So the latest turnover rates through year end, you can see our city sworn is the black line, the city non-sworn is the green line, and where we're projecting city non-sworn to be 24.57% by the end of the year. Good. And then also just for the mandate, the vaccine mandate, because I know that there's some questions about that too. There's currently 18 employees that are non-compliant. 0.78% of those employees are sworn or not are sworn staff. 1.37 are non-sworn staff. So that could potentially change our projected turnover rate to 9.85% for sworn and 25.94% for non-sworn. So this is our 2021 vacancy rate and turnover by department. It's probably kind of small for you to see, but I will send these slides to you after the meeting. Good. Gonna keep going if that's okay. And then just to put this in context a little bit, we had 876 non-sworn staff in 2014. Currently, we're at 877 non-sworn staff. So this is a pretty telling graph right here. And our non-sworn staff level in June of 2020 was 965, and we're currently at 877.
So Amy, what do you attribute that to?
It's just we just have a lot of people leaving the city, non-sworn staff. So I mean, we've lost quite a bit just from June of 2020, from 965 to 877. And when you ask HR, when they talk about it, the most notable reason is pay. But then again, you have an attrition issue. When you have an attrition issue, it will cause an attrition issue because people get overworked and tired and they leave and go on to other places where they're not going to have to work as hard as they work here.
Amy, are you going to show us a comparison to the positions that are approved in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is next. Staffing and budget levels. So we have 1,120 non-sworn positions budgeted. 877 of those are filled, and we have 821 sworn positions budgeted, and 771 of those positions are filled. So it's a total of 1,900 positions budgeted with 1,648 positions filled currently.
So go over that again, a total of 1,900 and what?
1,941 positions are budgeted.
Okay.
And we have 1,648 of them filled.
So we're down
total.
300.
Yeah, that's sworn versus, it's both sworn and non-sworn. 1,120 non-sworn positions are budgeted, 877 are filled, and 821 sworn positions are budgeted, and 771 of those are filled.
Is it a higher concentration in any one particular department versus another?
Oops, so let me go back to this. Fire non-sworn, I mean, that's a pretty small group of people, but that's pretty high. You have stormwater, TNT,
Gee,
parks, public service.
yeah. I chaired stormwater. I didn't know we had 41% vacancy rate. Gee,
It's pretty high right now.
Mhm.
yeah. And TNT, I mean, like, where's that concentrated? Anybody know?
Well, they're not as big a department, so, a few positions makes a bigger percentage, but I think it's in traffic signals division.
Yeah.
Even having one guy short in the sign shop and that things like that make a difference in the percentages.
Right.
Right now, we're short an assistant director as well. We're hiring.
That would also include the parking enforcement officers as well.
Oh, that's right.
Their
And
house
parking
is,
enforcement.
TNT.
Good point.
Okay. So we originally recommended increasing minimum wage to $14. Cost to do that between the general fund and enterprise funds was around a little over $7 million. But because we're of the shortfall we're experiencing, we adjusted this to increasing it 50 cents in January and 50 cents in July to save us $1.87 million. So we'll still get there. We just won't get there until July.
Mr. Mayor, let me speak to that. If we're losing people, and we're going to give a pay raise, hopefully, because they deserve it, and then hopefully for retention as well, a dual purpose. Why would we delay it 6 months pay raise? I mean, we subject to have additional runoff. Mount Pleasant has given pay raises. North Charleston has given pay raises. I hadn't seen what the county has done, but my understanding, we've lost some trash truck drivers to the county recently. So that tells me, they're getting paid more going across the street, so to speak. What does it take if we were to, is it 1.87 million if we were to do that pay raise in January?
That's right.
And so that's something we can still work on, Councilmember Waring, particularly if the little project that you and I are working on
Right.
that could resolve later in this week could bring us about half of that.
Okay.
I'm still hoping by the time we get to the budget next week, we can still keep hope alive.
So it's good. I mean, listen, we got to pay our people, man.
At the same time, we're trying to walk a balance beam here and balance this budget too.
I understand, but I agree with you. I'm frugal with other people's money as well. But my understanding is that we had to bring this home. We had 7. I got this from Matt. We had 7 basically ditch cleaning crews, and now we're down to 2. And basically you can't find people to go in there and cut trees and weeds and stuff for $13.50 an hour.
So what Amy's presenting to us right here, as Councilmember Shade asked a minute ago, our shortfall is 3.9. If we went to the full dollar on January 1, then our shortfall would be an additional 1.87 plus the 3.9, or almost 5.8 million.
Got your 5.7, right, 5.8 million. And a mill gets us how much, Amy?
1.7.
And Amy, what you got proposed here at a minimum wage of $14 an hour is not the same as to what the other local governments have for their minimum wage. We sold
We're still behind,
a dollar short per hour, right?
Really?
or more.
Or more.
Mhm.
Right.
We're still planning on, you know, bumping that up in the following year or two. But let's keep rolling and get all the information out here. There you are.
Okay, so then the other thing where we had the 2021 budget cuts that we funded by ARPA that we brought to you, and I guess it was, I don't remember, September, maybe it was October, that you all approved. It's about $268,000.
Right.
So those are included in the 2022 budget, but there's revenue there to cover that. And then these are the high priority requests that we're funding with ARPA funds. These are one-time things. Most notably, the larger items are the EDMS system to continue that project for electronic document management system, the water plan, and the zone ordinance comp plan, part of the comp plan, the downtown plan. Those are the larger items on that list that I'm just highlighting.
These are all included in the proposed budget at this point, but being funded through the ARPA funds that we'll technically won't be receiving until May.
Right.
Other high priority requests that are really funded with hospitality fee fund and general fund reserves. The security cameras, those are all in tourist areas for the police department. And then all the other items are, our financial policy requires us to put $1 million away for maintenance. And so we're using those funds for, to do those projects for renovations to those locations.
Let me ask this, Amy, the security cameras,
Mhm.
do you remember whether that included cameras on the West Ashley Greenway?
No, these are all downtown in the tourist district, and I think Market and King Street and maybe East Bay.
Hmm.
I didn't hear anything. I don't remember anything about the Greenway, Councilmember Waring.
Conversation, it wasn't on budget workshop, but that was conversation with the mayor and Councilmember Ross and folk.
We asked Lieutenant King to look into that for us, and he was going to check with the police IT folks, but I can't say that he's reported back to me, or it certainly hadn't been included in this budget.
Okay,
Council member, I can follow up on that for you. We'll get back to you.
that'd be very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these were other special requests. There were the first two items on there, a housing construction project manager and the community liaison and homelessness specialist. Those were both positions that were added mid-year. And I don't remember if I think one was 2020, one was 2021, that are being covered by program income because we didn't have budgeted funds to cover them. And so those cannot continue to be covered by program income. So we made a deal with Gianna that we'd add them in the 2022 budget. She ended up carrying those a little bit longer for us than we initially had anticipated. So those are those two positions. And then Mayor requested a Hope Center director and social worker for the Hope Center, and then also an additional community liaison person and traffic safety inspector. The traffic safety inspector will be covered by the new fees that were implemented this summer. And then the recreation enterprise manager was recommended in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So we included that position as well. Any questions?
No.
And then with all that, we still have a shortfall. So just kind of looking at why we're having such a hard time balancing the budget. We've talked about this a while back, a few years ago, about the general fund deficit and the parking fund surplus. It's just our deficit is growing faster than our parking fund surplus. And it's especially true now that our parking fund revenues have not rebounded completely from the pandemic. So this kind of shows you where we are in terms of parking, because the general fund has been relying heavily on parking fund in order to balance the budget over the last few years. So, and obviously for the last 2 years, that hasn't been an option. So it's just made it a little bit more difficult for us to balance the budget. Any questions on that?
That's one reason.
And then also our general fund growth, our expenditures are growing at a faster pace than our revenues. And then police and fire expenditures usually exceed our property tax revenues, and they will probably continue to do that. But no, in 2021, our base budgets for police and fire were cut. So that's why that gap isn't as wide as it typically is, because we cut their base budgets as much as we did.
Hey, Amy,
Yes.
is there a particular garage that is underperforming more than any other garage?
I'd have to get back to you on that, Councilmember
Okay.
Shane.
No, okay.
Amy, can you go back to the previous slide?
Mhm.
Yeah, so on parking revenue, we're down about $8 million. I'm reading that
Well,
right?
that's just the surplus. It's
Oh.
it's the surplus. It's not the total revenues.
Okay. So how much in revenues are we down?
I want to say like $6 million.
It's still a hit. Thank you.
Mhm. Maybe 4 to 6, Councilmember Waring. All of these numbers are kind of jumbled in my head.
It's okay.
Amy,
Yes.
Amy, on the parking, how much of a bump did we get in parking revenues when we extended the meters to 10 o'clock? I mean, it was fairly significant, wasn't it?
It was.
Well, there's a source of revenue right there. I
I
mean,
can't
people
remember
are
the
back.
exact number, but I bet you I'll get a text message in a second that will tell me how much it was.
I remember it was in the millions. It wasn't a small amount of money.
I think it might have been 2 million.
Okay. Well, there's
But
2 million.
I'll tell you in a second. I'm sure I will be getting a text that will tell me that number.
Thanks.
Mhm. And so how do we handle the shortfall? This is what we discussed with ad hoc last week, that we could accept the city's 22 budget as described in our previous slides, which would have been with a $2.2 million shortfall and not restoring overtime and funding certain items with ARPA. And we could use general fund reserves to balance the budget. We have that 20% policy amount. So even though we had that, when we closed out the books for 2020, I reserved a little bit more just because I wasn't certain about the pandemic and where we were heading. So we do have a little bit extra, more than our 20% policy amount that could cover that shortfall. But doing that only exacerbates our inability to fund items in 2023 because you're using general fund reserves to fund expenditures that are ongoing. So we'll just continue to have that problem in the next year. So our projected 22 expenditure budget, our 20% target, it would be $43.7 million. Right now we have $46.8 million in unassigned fund balance. So we have a little over $3 million to cover that $2.2 million shortfall. But again, we should never be using reserves to cover ongoing expenses. I know you're all sick of me saying that. And also keep in mind that as a budget grows, the 20% requirement increases. So if we were to increase that any more than that, 20% would also increase, and that leaves you less to use in reserves.
Amy,
Yes.
if we were to go back to Councilman Seeking's point about meters, parking meters, being extended on the time. Is all of the ARPA funds, I understand those are one time and probably last time funds, are all those spoken for 22?
No, there's still about $6 million left in our ARPA funds after all of this.
The reason I'm bringing that up, if obviously parking's gonna take a time to come back. If we were to do the extend the parking meter time, and we picked up 2 million, and we budgeted that in, and somehow it turned out to be slower responding than we thought, can we make that difference up? Because it's just bridge time to get from wherever we are now to hopefully a stronger economy. If it's not next year, the year after, can we bridge that difference from ARPA funds? Let's say it ends up generating 1.5 million instead of 2 million or 2.2 million. We could hit that gap with ARPA funds and obviously not go to our reserves.
Well, so when I said 2 million, that was in good times, right? So we probably wouldn't budget the $2 million anyway. We'd kind of look at it to see where we are and put in whatever, we conservatively thought we could generate from that.
Right.
So.
But we potentially could have a plan B for a difference. I know that doesn't repeat itself, but if we had another 12 months on this, prayerfully, our economy would be a little bit stronger.
The other thing, Amy, I think, and Councilmember Waring, is because of the new traffic configurations on Upper King Street on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we're not going to see as big a bump quickly because we shut down the parking for about 5 or 6 blocks, which would be pretty prime parking. So we're not going to see it go right back to pre-pandemic levels so long as that configuration is in place. And it's my understanding that the chief and his team want to keep that configuration in place for some period. So, it's not quite the boon that it might have been before COVID.
Right. What about the that bill that was introduced as well? That's dead, correct?
Yeah, it's languishing. It's not going to be around at least through 2023. You talk about the bill where we lose money from the state if we charge after 6. I think it's dead.
Okay. That was another reason, Councilmember Waring, because that bill had been introduced where we would end up losing funding for whatever amount we collected in enforcement of the meters.
So, and I might add, and Amy, I'll be interested to hear the number you get reported back from staff, but I asked Robbie this question the other day, and he didn't feel that it was nearly that much money, that the income we were picking up from 6 to 10, number one, and number two, we have extra expenses. We don't normally keep those PEOs on the street during those hours. And then number three, I just got to say, I mean, the folks that are having a hard time, the workers that are having a hard time have been most appreciative that they've been able to find some parking without having to pay for it. The hospitality and restaurant workers that are out there, I've gotten, and I think it kind of helped us after COVID to get going again with our hospitality and restaurant business. So anyway, you got to think about all those factors, before we go back to committing to after 6 collections.
The second option that we presented to ad hoc was a millage increase. Value of 1 mill is 1.7. 2 mills would yield a $3.4 million increase. 3 mills would yield 5.1. Right now, our millage bank is currently about 3.4 mills. So we could not go higher than 3 mills. A 2 mill increase would cover the 2.2 million shortfall and some of the costs to restore overtime in the department, which is 3.9 that the mayor is speaking of in total. But we would still need to cover approximately $460,000 with general fund reserves.
So Amy, suppose we did 2.5 mil. That would give us about what? About 4 million, 4.2 million, something like that.
Yeah, so half of 1.7, so a little over 800,000.
4.25, yeah, 4.25.
So can we then maybe use some other monies and then maybe a small amount of reserves to get to the 3 mills?
Say that again.
Hey, sounds like to me to get to be able to give out people a pay raise in January, we need to be around 3 mils, not 2. That chart, I think, I don't know if you have it on this presentation. I may be speaking before my turn. If you have it on it, those who were not on the call last week, Amy had a wonderful slide that showed just how effective.
It's coming.
Oh, it's coming. I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet then. Wonderful slide.
So talking about millage increase, because we had, talked about local option sales tax at the council meeting in the prior week before that. So keep in mind that the credit that's provided by local option sales tax, the impact of a millage increase decreases over time. But of course, that's also dependent on the economy because it's driven by consumer spending, and any weather events could also impact local option sales tax. So I have the next slide, which will show our net millage, which is what the credit does to our millage, the local option sales tax credit does. And you'll notice that in non-reassessment years, the millage, it will decrease. And I'm sorry, in reassessment years, you'll see a decrease in net millage, but there's also in some years where there's not a reassessment where you see the millage rate decreases because of local option sales tax. And then also noting that that's giving 100% back. So if we were ever to consider giving less than 100% back, that credit that our citizens see would, it would take longer for them to see a real impact or savings to their property tax bill. So this is our net millage going back to 2009. So this is our millage rate. And then this is what our net millage ends up being because of the local option sales tax. That's the savings that's provided to our citizens. So you can see in 2009, our net millage was 61.4 mils. And now in 2021, it's 61.3 mils. And you can see we had a tax increase here in 2013. And really in the next year, because of the credit, you can see it already started to save. The impact of that already started to go away for our citizens. And then you'll see here for 2020, we didn't have a millage increase or anything like that, but you see where the credit actually has decreased the millage rate that our citizens have to pay. Does that make sense?
Listen, I hope everybody who maybe has a gray area on this would ask questions, because you can go back, our net millage increase, and that's what comes out of the pocket to the taxpayers. I understand it's hard for the taxpayers to understand. I think it's key that we understand it. Our 13 people understand it. I mean, our net tax millage rate in 2009 was 61.4. Now it's 61.3. 12 years later. As I said, and Peter, I remember you singling me out on this in a good way. Every single homeowner in St. Andrews PSD pays higher property taxes than every owner-occupied house in the city of Charleston because of that credit going back to the taxpayer. I don't know that we'll be able to explain that in the public in a quick soundbite, but we know how effective it is. But even if we were to, where was was it 13? We had a tax increase, Amy?
We did, and that was specifically for the SSRT team, if you remember.
I remember that.
Sandy Hook, and then also to purchase a fire truck.
And how many mills was that?
So it went from 78.8 to 82.3. And so our net millage was 63.1 in 2013, but then the next year went down to 62.3.
And then the next year it went down to 60.6.
That's right.
So in less than 2 years, more than that millage was recouped. Actually, they were paying less taxes in 15 than they did 13.
Well, in 2015 was a reassessment year too, so you have to remember that. So they're, that will affect their tax bills as well.
Right.
If you just look at the last year from 2020 to 2021, Our rate stayed the same at 81.3, but our net millage went down from 63.1 to 61.3. And that's why when I was showing you my tax bill from this year versus last year with no change in millage, I had a $58 reduction in my tax bill. And I invite all of y'all to compare your bills to the year before, because that's what our citizens have seen in the last year is actually a tax reduction.
Hey, Amy, I have just a couple of questions as well.
Councilmember Saccharin and then Griffin.
Thank you, Mayor. So reading this chart to Councilman Waring's point, the general public doesn't understand that there's been essentially a net, it's been neutral, right, since 2009 in terms of the net millage increase. Is that correct?
That's right.
So as a new council member, when I often hear, folks, constituents come to me asking me questions, I guess, in a nutshell, what is making our budget unsustainable? Meaning as we move forward, we keep talking about, parking fees and all these small pots, but is there something thematic or is there a bigger picture thing that we could share with constituents about why this is not sustainable? As I look at these numbers, I'm thinking to myself, we've had population increases. We've had not just population, but the size of the city has expanded. And here we are with the same millage rate as we are in 2009. How is that sustainable?
Well, we're getting to a point where it's not. So that's what the problem is. So we do have more, we're bigger as a city government, and we're providing more services than we did before. We just have a lot more strains on our budget than we did in 2009.
Councilmember Griffin.
Pardon me, excuse me, I didn't get my question answered.
I'm sorry.
I'd like to better understand why it's not sustainable. From what reason? Is it just what revenues aren't making up for the expenses? That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
So if you saw the slides that I showed prior, where we're relying a lot on our parking fund, which our parking fund is not able to cover or balance our budget like it has in the past. And then if you see our expenses are they're out running our revenue. So our expenses are growing faster than our revenues are.
Okay.
If you look over that same period, by the way, Councilmember Saccharin, we've increased funding for police and fire at a higher percentage rate than property values have increased, even with our growth. So we've been increasing certain budgets, and we're limited by state government in the things that we can charge. And property tax makes up what, Amy, about 45% of our revenue?
Right.
Something like that. So this is just one component of our revenue. It was really a blessing, for years, and even before I got elected, there'd be these annual shortfalls with the general fund, and then the parking revenue would come in and kind of magically balance the books, and we just haven't had that luxury, particularly in the last 2 years. And maybe it'll do better in 2022, but we try to be conservative on our estimates so that we don't get caught short.
Another thing too is fire stations. When we add a fire station, that is a pretty big hit to our budget as well, because one fire company is probably $1.3 million just in salaries. So that's a big expense as well. And we'll be adding, in a couple of years, we're going to be adding another fire station on Johns Island, and there's several stations that we need. So and those will be bigger stations as well with 2 companies in them. So you're talking double the cost there.
So that's another reason to be mindful of using one-time income for balancing things, when we know next year we got a fire station on Johns Island we're going to be building and adding staff. We're we need to add another fire station out on Clements Ferry Road. So it's, these needs are going to continue for a while. If we use one-time money, it just pushes, really kicks the can down the road. Councilmember Griffin?
Yes, sir. And just want to thank you, Amy, and your staff for putting together all these scenarios for us. And, you know, obviously, as we continue to try to come out of this pandemic, I'm, you know, thankful that we were able to, you know, give a net millage decrease last year and save people a little bit of money, because last year was a rough year for everybody, you know, city included. But the economy is a lot better now. And I'm very, very concerned that if we don't pay our employees more, we're not going to be able to serve our citizens and give them their basic needs. So I'm, you know, supportive of us increasing the millage, if that means that it's going to give an increase in wages to our city employees, because, you know, it is really, really disheartening to see how many vacancies we have. And they're in the positions that we need the most. Councilmember Waring's already touched on it. You know, when you've got 40% of the stormwater department that we've got openings, you know, that is something that I think at the end of the day, if we have to go back to our citizens and say, hey, look, we're asking you to pay $20 or $30 more next year, but that means we're going to be able to, you know, get you the services that you need. Public services is another department. Sanitation, we've got 28% vacancies, and yeah, these are the basic services that we provide to our citizens. But our property taxes don't even cover all of those costs. So, you know, I think the economy is a lot better this year. You can get a job really anywhere. You look around the private sector that are offering similar jobs to what we have, they can go there and make a lot more. So we've got to be more competitive now if we want to be able to convince somebody who has a CDL to come and work for the city, or, you know, do public services or work in stormwater. I mean, these positions, they could go to a construction company or go to a private third-party sanitation department, and they're going to make more at other places, but they're also going to have to, you know, they're not going to have as good benefits. You know, we offer outstanding benefits. So I think this is definitely the time where we, you know, look at getting our employees that raise in pay. And if it means that people are going to get their services taken care of, they're going to understand it. Last year was a different scenario. And obviously I was adamant about not increasing taxes last year because we were in the middle of the pandemic, but our economy is doing very well this year. I expect it to go very well next year as well. I don't think as good as this year, but I think next year will be a good year. And I think that we're in a lot different position because everybody's hiring, everybody's more competitive with pay. You could go anywhere right now and get a job. We as a city have got to be more competitive with our pay, or else we're going to have to tell our citizens that we can't service them the way that we should. So I thank you, Amy, for presenting all these options, but you're not going to have the same kind of pushback from me this year as you did last year, because I just feel like we're in a much different place. And I think it's very warranted that we take a hard look at getting our pay increase for our employees.
Can I just add something too, because I forgot to add it when we were talking about the attrition rate and things like that, HR had provided me with some information on the number of, there's 19 positions that are advertised right now. And they've had almost 176,000 views of those positions by people. And we've had 530 applicants. So typically what you want is a 20% general goal for that. And we're at 0.3%. So, I mean, there's like zero for our tree maintenance tech 1. We've had 701 views, 0 people have applied for that job. My finance director, it's 530 views. We've gotten 7 applications, most of which aren't qualified for that job. So just putting that into context as well. I'm sorry, Councilmember Jackson.
Jackson, and then Appel had his hand up as well. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. And I'm probably, you know, out of line in terms of trying to make some future forward generalizations about all of this, but I think Councilmember Saccharin was getting at it. A couple of your slides, Amy, you know, tell the tale. The city is upside down on residential, the formula for supporting our residential or single family neighborhoods, which are the hallmark of the way that Charleston grew over the last 40 years, right? We subdivided, we grew into farmland, we added territory that we couldn't cover with our fire and police without building a lot of new capital improvements and then staffing them to go along with it. And we're not holding water. We're drowning in the residential formula. And I know we can't solve that on this budget. I would totally agree with the millage increase. I'm very happy to hear Councilmember Griffin, you know, understand that this is a whole new game this year than last year. I would totally agree with that. But I think we need to get serious as a metropolitan area, and especially as the city of Charleston, to go to the state and start knocking on the door about Act 388. The whole primary, the way that primary owners are allowed to basically underpay for the cost that it takes to serve them well as residents, permanent residents, is just upside down. And we know that we have a demographic now that's coming from a lot of other locations to settle in here. The pandemic only made that more obvious. People are able to move here permanently and work everywhere, according to the virtual IT industry. Those residents, you know, think that they have the best deal ever, and they're totally shocked when they come and see how little their property taxes are compared to what they want out of a metropolitan area like this with the sophistication that we have. So again, I know this is not, you know, anything that we can decide right this minute, but my time is short. And I really do believe that this is something that needs to be taken on as a holistic task force measure, get our partners together. Goose Creek is going to be experiencing this in the short term if they're not already. The metropolitan area growth for permanent residency cannot sustain itself with the formula that the state has limited us to with this 388 4% primary ownership formula. And as a private citizen, I'll be very happy to work on this. I think it's important to each one of us. Certainly my kids, my grandson, we cannot sustain ourselves. So I would agree, let's raise the millage, let's balance the budget, let's use ARPA funds for everything we possibly can qualify. But we've got to know that we're going into a future that can be sustainable.
Well, thank you. And that Act 388 really put a burden on commercial properties. And so that's why it's painful for us to talk about any millage increase, I think, because of the impact on commercial and business properties. And that flows down to rental properties and everything, small businesses and anyone who rents an apartment or a home rather than is happy, fortunate enough to be in home ownership. So yeah, 388 just turned it upside down. The worst impact, I think, was on our school system. And I mean, I got the original intent of looking out for homeowners, and that's it just went a little too far, if in my view.
Yeah,
So,
that was
anyway.
during the deepest recession. We can't sustain that any longer, Mayor. So, and I know that Councilmember Appel, hopefully he's going to make that point right now because he was very eloquent about that.
Oh, y'all are putting me up to it. You're egging me on. I would say that Councilman Griffin and Councilman Jackson stole a lot of my thunder. I think y'all have hit the nail on the head. I mean, I read in the Post and Courier recently, Senator Leatherman, who recently passed away, was probably the most powerful person in the state. I think I read that, you know, he said that Act 388 was one of his biggest regrets in a long tenured career in South Carolina politics. It's probably one of the worst pieces of legislation that the General Assembly has passed and there's been some good contenders up there. And, it's not just for, urban, cities like us. It makes South Carolina one of the most anti-competitive, anti-business states in the country when it comes to property taxes. You ever wonder why all these big corporations have to go to county governments and, ask for these fee in lieu of taxation, sweetheart deals, Project Zeus, project, all these little secret projects they've always got on their agendas? It's because they can't afford these property taxes in South Carolina at that 6% rate. And it's a really horrible piece of legislation that it's an anti-conservative piece of legislation, anti-business. It's really, really a horrible law that I hope, the folks up in Columbia can get to at some point. But for here in the city of Charleston, as applied to our situation, as Councilwoman Jackson pointed out, we have entire council districts that are essentially welfare districts. No offense to anybody. I'm not going to call out any names or anything like that. But what I mean by that is you have more demand for services than you pay to provide, right? It's an unfair scenario. Let me just be very clear. And I think Amy's got some slides coming up that actually puts into context what a 2 mil, 3 mil increase actually redounds to for 4% property. Let me just be crystal clear on this issue. This is a non-issue. This tax increase is a non-issue for 4% properties. If you're going to fuss about $20, $30, $50 a year in order to keep our firefighters paid and to keep our police officers paid and our public works folks and all of our other departments paid, that is, you're stoking fires. You're trying to get people riled up. It's a non-issue for 4% primary residents. Our taxes are so low for 4% properties in the city. It's sad. It really is. Now for 6%, that's an argument. That is a real concern. We cannot run too hot with 6%, or you can run into a situation that the city of Columbia dealt with, and they're struggling with, and they're having to get their ducks in a row up there. I personally don't think we're at a point where a 2-3 mil increase for 6% properties is going to cause some sort of economic shockwave through the peninsula that's going to cause all kinds of problems. What are the folks on the peninsula saying in terms of, what they need from us? They want more stuff done on King Street. They want more police patrol. They want all these different things. This is what we need to do to be able to provide our citizens with the services they desire, not just on the peninsula, but off the peninsula as well. And if you've got a city budget that's predicated on parking revenue, right, coming in to cover our general fund expense, what are we? Are we a parking business, or are we a city, right? We need to have a solid foundation fiscally in order to operate and to provide our constituents with services. And if we've got good parking years, well, then we can do some fun stuff with some of that surplus as time dictates. But right now, we are not in a fiscally sustainable position, as has been pointed out by everybody. I think we need to really give some strong consideration to these millage increases. I hope we don't get into some of the politics that we got into last year about this. I think it's really a tempest in a teapot. It's not that big of a deal. And if you're someone who's been super fortunate to own very expensive property downtown that's seen tremendous property appreciation over the last several years, yes, you are going to be disproportionately hit with a millage increase. But when you put your head on the pillow at night, just be thankful that you're the beneficiary of millions of dollars in property value appreciation. So, it's just, you got to put these kinds of things into perspective and not just, panic when you talk about tax increases. And I think Councilman Griffin really had a mature and very well reasoned commentary just now on all this. And I hope we can engage these coming discussions in the coming weeks and months in that spirit of unity, because we got to do what's right for the city. We got to do what's best for the city, not just on the peninsula, but in all of the districts. And we'll provide the services that our constituents demand. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilmember. All right. Amy, you've still got some more, don't you, on your presentation? Let's.
Mayor,
Oh yeah, Councilmember Gregory.
Yeah, before we move on, it's very, very encouraging to hear the discussion.
Yes, sir.
That people generally clearly understand that our biggest asset is our employees, and that I think that our budget needs to also be centered around that. And I agree that the tax increase is really a non-issue. $40, $60 a year. Come on, it could be made political, but as the representative of the people, we know how minimal that would be. So it's very, very encouraging to listen to this discussion, because I am where you guys are, and I've been there for a while, that we must protect our greatest asset, which is our staffing.
Well, thank you. And as I've shown with my own bill, I hate to keep coming back to that, but you know, we offset it every year with that's what gives us this net effect from 2009 to 21 is the LOST credit. Really is almost like a reduction of $500,000 every year on average. So it really balances out over time. And this is maybe a little off topic, but since Councilmember Appel made that comment about the parking garages, you know, it's even sadder when you think that when we were magically using that extra parking revenue to balance our budgets, we were not doing the maintenance and repairs to some of those garages that's, you know, building up over time, because we always needed that extra funding to balance the general fund. We were deferring the maintenance on the parking garages. And so anyway, that's out there also, y'all. Back to Amy.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Griffin has his hand up.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Griffin.
Mr. Mayor, just because you also keep mentioning about you had what, $58
Yes, sir.
as a reduction. So even if we raised the millage by 2 or 3 mills this year, by still allowing that local option sales tax credit to come back, we should be able to keep very close to a net even where the increase may only be $10, or it's going to be something very, very minimal. And I hope that we can, as we move forward, and if we, you know, get serious about, you know, I think at least a 3 mil increase, if we can sort of break that down so that we can put that out there, that you're still going to get your local option sales tax credit, and it's really going to balance it out. So I hope we can do that, because I don't want people to think that we're, you know, trying to take away their money. I hate reaching in other people's pockets, but, you know, we're going to do things to minimize that as much as we can. I know we will.
That's right. Thank you. All right, Amy, let's see if we can work on through the rest of it.
So this was just an increase depending on 2 or 3 mills, on a 4% property in Charleston County. So 2 mills would be $40, 3 mills would be $60. And then Berkeley County, obviously it's the same 4% property. And then Charleston County, for 6%, it's $60 or $90, depending on 2 or 3 mills. And then same for Berkeley County. And then, so the proposed budget, a few minor changes from what we presented last week. The mayor would like to include a 2 mil increase in the 2022 budget and add the 2 positions, annexation coordinator, which we talked about last week at ad hoc, and then the associate preservation planner enforcement officer. Both would report to planning. And then also restoring overtime. We said before, this is one of the main requests from our departments. It's especially important to the fire department to enable them to keep up with their training, because they utilize personnel from operations division to provide the training and keep their instructor to student ratios where they need to be according to the state. And they receive overtime in order to do that, because we don't have enough people. And then also for their special operations companies, last year was tough for them to continue that training for special ops because of the overtime cuts. And they really need to get them back to training as whole companies again. And then, so these are what the changes would be, the annexation, those 2 positions. We had a couple other minor adjustments that we made in the parking fund. And then the restoration of overtime would bring our shortfall to $3.8 million. 2 mills would provide the additional 3.4. So we'd still have a shortfall of $460,000, which we could cover with general fund reserves. Any questions on that?
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would appreciate hearing your reasons for making that change. I thought that the ad hoc committee, and I know that, you know, it's not our budget, it's your budget, but it seemed to me like we were pretty much in agreement a week ago that 3 mills was the right number. And that would give us some opportunity to even entertain a couple of other additions to the budget that, you know, didn't make the cut when you were trying to stay at the 2.2 million. So can you tell us why you don't think we should be going on to 3?
Well, I did speak with a couple other council members who were a little hesitant about 3, so I didn't know how supportive the entire council would be. I knew also that Councilmember Waring and I are working on an initiative that might bring in about $1 million extra. We'll know that in the next week or so, and so that's that's a $500,000 right there. And then I wanted to try to keep the balance between that net millage reduction from the lost and the increase to be approximately the same, to be honest with you. And we're walking that balance beam, trying to balance a budget. Councilmember Shade.
So Mayor, I'm glad to see you put back in here the annexation coordinator. I've been beating on that drum for quite a while, and I really appreciate you doing that. And to some of the comments I've heard from my colleagues, the annexation coordinator is going to help fill in these donut holes that we have. And I can go through several of the neighborhoods in my district that are half in and half out. Avondale is one of them. Pinecrest is another. Huntington Woods is another one. And you know, when you had these donut holes, there's a couple of things are happening. Number one, we're not collecting a tax, property tax from those folks, those residences that are not within our jurisdiction. And Councilwoman Waring just pointed this out early on in this presentation. When you look at it, the St. Andrews Public Service District, they're actually paying more in taxes because they don't get the benefit of the LOST cut that we're getting. So they're losing out. They don't understand that, but they're losing out. You have a garbage truck that goes down one street and it's hopscotching as to what trash is picking up. And another truck comes behind it that fills in those areas that are not within the city limits. I don't know what this is going to create from a revenue standpoint. And I don't know if we can generate that kind of numbers. But if we're bringing in a significant amount of homeowners in these neighborhoods, that's going to increase our tax base. I don't know if that's going to have a huge impact, a no impact, a small impact, but it certainly is going to provide for, at the minimum, much better government. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have this issue with my constituents when they're trying to do something with speed enforcement, like creating calming devices on their street or other issues. You run into these roadblocks from time to time that you can't provide them with good service because their streets half in and half out of the city jurisdiction. So Mayor, I really do appreciate you bringing this back up. And I think we're going to see our money's worth when we hire this annexation coordinator. Thank you for including that in there.
Oh, well, you're welcome. And I share the feeling, although you can't budget it, that after a year or so, this position will more than pay for itself. Yeah. And then the code enforcement for preservation, all of our commissions of BAR small have been reaching out to me about the need for better enforcement for all the BAR and DRB decisions that are made. That, you know, we value preservation, but then sometimes folks go out and do something else. So we just got to be mindful, and we needed an enforcement officer to follow behind all of our zoning and design boards to make sure that folks are doing what they've agreed to do.
Yes.
Hey, Mayor, one question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. To going back to Amy, to your slide a bit ago with the 2 mil versus 3 mil, quite full of transparency. I'm probably supportive of either one. I just want to make sure we go back to that hourly rate increase that Councilman Griffin mentioned earlier and was supportive of. You know, as a small business owner right now, I can tell you 13, 14 bucks an hour is barely competing. So I just want to make sure we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're thinking proactively for the next year about what the job market's going to unveil. So with that 2 mil increase, does that increase our hourly rates to 14 bucks an hour?
It does it in 6-month increment. So it'd be $13.50 in January and then 14 in July.
Mr.
So
Mayor,
not for the full year.
Okay.
Councilmember Griffin?
but if we were to do a 3 mil increase, we would be able to have it for the whole year, correct?
So that was the other thing that Councilmember Jackson was just talking about, that we talked about an ad hoc as 3 mil and adding, so having the restoring overtime and then also having the full year pay plan. And so with that, we would still have a shortfall of about $600,000 that we would need to cover with general fund reserves.
I'm supportive of that.
Me as
So am
well.
I.
Me too.
Councilmember Brady?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amy, I had a question on, we were showing the net millage, and then we were showing what the 2 and 3 mil increase would be. Would we be able to just game out what it would look like for that property tax bill so that we actually can show that to the citizens in terms of, here's what you were paying like on your bill last year, and then with the mill increase, what you would potentially pay kind of overall? Because I'm sure we can game out a little bit what the LOST could look like. But I think it's just important that people just kind of see that, you know, compared to 2 years ago, yes, we had to raise the millage, but you're going to be paying essentially the same as you were 2 years ago, or, you know, whatever that ends up being.
We can, but so Councilmember Brady, what happens with the local option sales taxes, we'll look at it depending on what the millage is that we decide to budget for, and we'll have a budgeted local option sales tax credit. But in September, when we get all the appraisal numbers and everything, we look at it, and that's when we kind of decide for the tax year what that local option sales tax number will be. It might be the same as what we budgeted, or it might not be. So really until September, we wouldn't know what that credit would look like. We would just be able to do it based on what we're budgeting, if that makes sense.
Yep. Like, because what I'm trying to
do it, we can do that.
Yeah, because what I'm just trying to drive at is that, you know, we're showing the $60 or $90 numbers, you know, which at the end of the day, I agree with Councilmember Rappel, you know, that's a rounding error essentially, for at that level of house and whatnot. But being able to show that, well, with the net millage, it's actually not going to be that exact number. It's actually going to probably be much lower.
Well, so these calculations are based on the tax, like this is what we would budget. So this would be what their tax bill would look like right now. So, I mean, this is kind of doing exactly what you're asking us to do, but we wouldn't know until September if we would need to adjust that to where the credit would be more, if that makes sense.
Yep. Got it.
Amy, can you go back to the 4% one more time real quick?
Yeah.
Just using the mayor's scenario, $58. For 3 mil increase, it would have been a $2 difference, correct? Mr. Mayor, I mean, your tax bill would have actually.
My assessment on my property is a little over 300. So,
It'd be a little bit different, but we're talking a couple of
it'd be a little
dollars.
bit different. I think it'd be a wash on the 2 mills about for my property.
But we're talking about a few bucks. I mean, we're talking about 20 or less.
It's not a big difference. That's
Right.
Councilmember Appel, then Waring.
I promise I'll be much more brief this time. But I think we've been having a very good discussion today. It would be neat if we could have our very talented staff that's involved in, these websites that are created and all these interactive online tools, create something where you can go online and run these essentially scenarios. So you can see what a 3 mil property tax increase, a 2 mil property tax increase would mean for you. And I mean, I'm sure this could be set up in a way where it links to the county's website and pulls in the numbers and has it all set up. I just think that would be a good communications tool if it's feasible to create, so that, when you talk about mills and you talk about you're going to lose people real quick. People want to know, what is the bottom line going to be? And I think to the extent we can provide a tool to easily help people do that by actually pulling, I'm envisioning as something where you could log on, type in your address or your TMS number or something like that. It can pull the assessed value from the county's website, run the calculations, and show you what your net tax increase will be, factoring in the loss and all that other kind of stuff. I think that'd be neat if we could pull that up and pull that off without having to do another tax increase just to fund that website.
Well, that's a good idea. I'm not sure we could pull that off by the time we need to pass this budget, but I'll ask Tracy and Amy to think on that, to look at it.
Yep, we can do that.
I think my nephew would help them. And Councilmember Waring.
Thank you. While we talking about, again, paying our people, doing this in 2 phases. I said this earlier, but I think it's repeating. To fix drainage, one of the I probably think the most cost-effective way to fix a drainage problem is to have clean ditches and open pipes. If we're going to give a pay raise in January and then another one in 6 months, we have allowances for 7 ditch cleaning crews, basically. And we have 2. We have 2 for the whole city. And we're going to wait to get them up to, our drainage coordinator has told us that we can't hire people at $13.50 an hour. Now, the 2 that we have, the 2 crews that we have, and I think about 7 people in a crew, suppose some of them leave between January and June, or January and July 1. I mean, we're talking about essential services. I think we need to come up with a methodology where we can pay our people beginning January 1. I understand clearly, Mr. Mayor, trying to ease our way into this, but 1,941 budgeted employees, and we have 1,640, 301 positions that we actually have budgeted. We can't get the people in there. Amy told us about HR, having positions advertised, and how many people hit the site and nobody applied because I guess the pay rate was too low. Anyway, that's not the way to run a railroad. And if people say, you raise my taxes, I have no trouble saying why we raised our taxes. And at the end of the day, if you want to keep it simple, let's find something to put online to say, compare the cities across South Carolina and their millage. The largest city in the state compared to number 2, 3, 4, 5 on millage rates. A lot of people will be shocked to find out that the city of Charleston millage rate, net millage rate, is lower than Mount Pleasant, North Charleston, Columbia, I don't know about Greenville, but it'd be interesting to see. Anyway, off the soapbox on that, Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering, I know we're going to hire coordinating annexation officer, and I'm for that. I agree with Councilman Shade and you on that. Should have done it a while ago. But I actually think the time has come for us to have a serious sit down, a conversation that doesn't have to be made public, even though I'm asking for it on a public line. The PSD is in a situation where, if you think we're in a situation, they have less people every year to spread a higher cost across. Every year we annex people. And every year they don't have subdivisions being built in the PSD. They don't have office buildings being built in the PSD. Why don't we just sit down with them to say, your people come in, they're going to get a tax deduction. We will absorb your firemen. We'll absorb your sanitation people. We probably can use some of the administration people. At the end of the day, we did that on their sewer services. I know because I was involved with a lawsuit when the PSD could not provide sewage to the subdivision that they had promised us. My father was on the PSD at the time, and I brought the lawsuit. The PSD had 2 sewer plants, and they went out of the sewer business. Mayor Rowley sat down with them and said, hey, look, guys, we can take over your sewage. We can take over your employees. They're not going to go unemployed. And we took those plants, City of Charleston, or CPW took those plants over. I actually think we're to the point right now with fire and with sanitation workers, where if they thought about it, the leaders of the PSD, those commissioners thought about it, they can give a tax deduction to every one of their owner-occupied citizens if they came into the city, and they can ensure that their employees probably will get a pay raise and better benefit. Why can't we sit down? Now, they can say no to that, but why not have that conversation? I mean, we can hire annexation coordinator. They can go onesie, and annex people, because when you show people that side by side that the city does, it's pretty compelling. Most people can almost save enough money to go on a cruise. I'm not making this up if they annex into the city. I don't think the commissioners at the PSD even know that. So why not reach out and try to have that kind of conversation with the PSD? Because I got to tell you, it would benefit everybody if we got rid of these donut holes from the standpoint of revitalizing West Ashley. Truth be known, a lot of the blighted areas West Ashley, frankly, are in the PSD. So I think we should extend the hand of fellowship, if you will, to the leadership of the PSD to see, can we negotiate something that makes sense for them and certainly for the citizens of Charleston. Anyway, I think that time is here.
I'll take that into consideration. Councilmember Gregory.
Yes, Mayor. Just to follow up on something that Councilwoman Jackson mentioned. At our last meeting, I did make the recommendations that we go to 3. Right. And I really haven't heard anything that would convince me differently. Because I think that we should not balance the budget on the backs of our employees. If we go with the incremental, it's going to cost our employees $1.9 million. Am I correct, Amy?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so that cost burden goes to staff. Why should we do that? Okay, I again think we should go with the 3 mil and invest in the treasure of this city that makes this city what it is, and its staff. It's just so simple to me, but let's see what happens.
All right, thank you. All right, Amy, did you have any more, or was that?
I have some more. So
Yep.
That's what the budget would look like with 2 mills and the $460,000 that I mentioned in the shortfall that we would have to fund with general fund reserves, which is more acceptable to fund a smaller amount of general fund reserves. And then I just kind of talk about with the 2 mills, the target increases to 44. And so we have about 2.8, which is less than the 3 million, was what I was trying to tell you before. As the budget grows, our 20% grows, and then the amount that we have to use is smaller. But it's never a good financial strategy to use general fund reserves anyway to covering ongoing expenses. And then also just to keep in mind that we cover many of our capital projects with assigned fund balance. And so if we weren't going to use some of this additional unassigned that we have, we could use it to cover some of the shortfalls we have in some of our projects. Right now, these are just examples of some projects that we have shortfalls because of the increase in construction costs. And one, our Carr Richardson Park general contractor has asked for a change order because of plumbing materials, and we're expecting that more contractors are going to ask for change orders because of the increase for cost of materials. So we're kind of managing that as well. So just to keep that in mind. And then in conclusion, the current draft budget is a 2 mil increase. Everything that we've talked about, 6-month increment for the $14, restoration of overtime, and covers most of the shortfall. We need to send the millage and budget information to the paper tomorrow because of state law requires us to do that. And then we'll have the full draft budget to you next week. And then I'm just asking if there's any questions or issues, but we've had this discussion about 3 mils, so I'm not exactly sure where y'all want to go now.
Is it time for a motion? Because I move that we go for 3 mil.
Second.
I'll second that motion.
All right. Well, I guess I'll call the question and see the recommendation I have here from council. How many would like to support that?
Aye.
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 All right. I think that was a majority. It's not an official vote.
Okay, I was
This
just
is
going
a
to
workshop
ask.
motion, a workshop meeting.
That's the majority.
Yep. Gotcha. All righty.
Okay, so that's really all I had. I guess I'm moving now towards a 3 mil increase, adding the full year pay plan for employees. And that's what we'll send to the paper tomorrow. And we will have the draft budget for you next week.
Amy,
Yes.
Councilmember Griffin.
what is that? What is that pay increase? What is the sliding scale for the increases in terms of percentages?
Okay, so for most of the grades, it's 7% or so. And then for the unclassified pay grade, which is most of your department heads, and then for sworn personnel, it's a little over 4. These are just, it's 4 point something percent because, you know, we're department heads, and then sworn also has their automatic steps and things like that. So they get additional increases. So that's why we included sworn in with the unclassified.
But we're pretty much giving all of our employees anywhere from at least a 4% up to over a 7% pay increase.
That's right.
That's something for all of us to be very excited about.
And just to be clear,
Exactly.
that's for police and fire as well. We can go
Yes.
around and tell our constituents that is a
Yeah,
4 to
it-
7%.
That's right. It includes
Citywide.
everybody. It's a full pay plan adjustment is what it is. Because when you're increasing minimum wage, you have compression issues. So you get into a situation where a staff person might make more than their supervisor if you don't adjust. So we have to push it through the whole entire pay plan. And so that's how it works out. So between 4 and 7, yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I want to ask one question, Amy, is with the 3 mils and if it goes up to whatever it is, that's including the deduction for the various deduction that they receive on the tax bill?
Yes, that's right. It includes yes. So it'd be with the local option sales tax credit, it'd be those numbers I showed you, Councilmember Mitchell.
Okay. That's what I wanted to make sure. So when I explained it.
Councilmember
But,
Shade. Councilmember Shade.
Yeah, and one thing, this is not for our consideration today or for this year, but one of the things we need to be looking at as this minimum wage goes up and Amy makes those adjustments for other of our staff, that the increase that they receive, either 4 to 7%. The one thing that we are going to have to be looking at very soon is that we need to be looking at our top tier positions, our directors and deputy directors of our departments, to do a comparison of their pay versus what other people in similar situations in other municipalities are being paid. That is another issue that I think we're going to have to be passing on down the road, not to address it today, but I just don't want us to walk away from this budget meeting thinking that we have solved this issue of retention, because we're still going to be losing some top tier folks because the pay that we're paying those top tier folks may not necessarily be in comparison with other municipalities. We've seen that happen on a few instances. I've talked to some of our directors about that, but that's something we just need to bring up later on. That's not for our discussion right now, but I don't want us to walk away with us thinking we have solved this problem completely at this point.
Right. I concur. Now, we did do this a couple of years ago for department heads, but honestly, there's some positions like engineering positions and stormwater engineers that have needed some adjustments because where we were with the marketplace, and we got to reserve the right to be able to look at those things individually as need comes along. Now, what we did a couple of years ago, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, is we set aside a little reserve, I guess you'd call it, for the year, so that as we looked at those kinds of desk audits, if you will, that we had a little flexibility to adjust. But we can always do that with the employee savings line item as well, I think. But you're right.
We always have a little bit in there for provision for salary increases, Mayor. So if something did come up, but like I said, pretty much every single department has been having this issue of losing employees, and this pay plan adjustment itself will take care of us having to do 800 different desk audits that they've been asking us to do. And then just to tell you, it's 7.7% for all of the grades, with the exception of the unclassified grade, which is 4.5%. So those are the exact percentages, Councilmember Griffin.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson and then
Yeah,
Brady.
that's what I was going to ask. When will the employees know specifically what their raise is based on that range of 4 to 7? So will they get a notice of a new number next month, or how does that work in terms of what they can be planning on for
Pass
their
the
own?
budget first.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we don't typically send anything out, just, with the first pay period of 2022, they'll just see the increase. But we don't typically send any letters out or anything like that, Councilmember Jackson, but they'll know the percentage that they could calculate it, and always call HR if they need to.
Councilmember Brady.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Councilmember Shea had said. I think it's also important, if we're going to do kind of the pay analysis across municipalities, I think it's also important that we take the time to look at, as the city's kind of grown over time, and the staff and the departments, for us to look at if our current structure is the best way that we're optimizing and utilizing our resources to the best of our ability, especially with the advent of technology and other measures of efficiency and productivity. It could be looking at whether we're structured correctly as well to maximize that return for our citizens. So I would ask that if we're going to look at the kind of pay disparities and the pay bands across municipalities, that we also just, maybe have to hire a consultant or anything like that, but just to look at our departments and as well see, if we're structured the best for mission delivery.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Well, thank y'all. Great discussion and great concern. As I started out today, I said I think this discussion is about our employees today, and y'all have proven that. So thank y'all for that, and I think we're heading in a good direction. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Amy, again. I mean,
Bye-bye.
I will send you all these slides if you want me to.
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there anything else I can give you?
Get a few numbers. Get a few of those numbers out of your head, Amy.
I will try. I dream about them, you know.
I'm sure you do.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.